Hey, folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mason. Happy New Year. This is the first episode of 2024, and this one's really unique. This is not like our other episodes where I interview somebody that has done a big adventure that I've never talked to, oftentimes don't have a relationship with. A lot of the times, Randy here has been, funny enough, a listener of Adventure Sports Podcast for years. And we've talked on Instagram and talked on the phone a few times for a handful of years now. And he always thought, like, hey, I haven't done anything yet that could be on the show. And finally, he retired as a cop and took a year and did some amazing adventures, the Tour Divide, the Colorado Trail, and the Arizona Trail. And I'm like, dude, that is so worthy of an episode. You don't even understand. That's amazing. Let's definitely talk. And this was one of the best interviews, the best conversations ever, because Randy's stories are incredible. He tells so many. We talked for almost 2 hours, and we didn't upload all of it, but we were on the phone over 2 hours, and this was just such a special experience. He's a huge inspiration to me, and really shows that adventure can happen anywhere to anyone, and it really is a choice more than it is anything else. It's a lifestyle. It's a mindset. Is what adventure is. You can fit adventure into small windows of time as you wait for big windows of time, like retirement. And so he's going to start with how he got into this. And it was just a chance encounter with someone he ran into while hiking with his son. And we talk about all kinds of stuff. So just, listen, enjoy. And Randy, there's so much I could say about you. And this was just such a special experience and such a great way to start the year off. Captures the entire essence of what this show is about and the kind of people and the kind of stories we like to tell. So, Randy, thank you so much for being on. You are absolutely worthy of being on here. He talks a lot about imposter syndrome, and which is so crazy to me because the story's amazing. And so, yeah. Thank you to everybody who's been listening. Last year, 2023, was amazing. I posted this kind of summary on LinkedIn of some of the big feats and some of the big just wins from the year. And we're going to have some really good stuff coming in 2024. We're getting very close to episode 1000, which is going to be very special. And we have some cool announcements to make by the end of the month. So let's go ahead and dive in. Randy Brandt, welcome to Adventure Sports Podcast.
Thank you, sir. I'm looking really forward to this.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it almost didn't happen just because I've had some technical issues, which happens from time to time. And I was like, I got to find a way. So I fired up the old laptop. I haven't used this in literally years. And because the screen's going out, but it's going in and out, but it sounds good. We're going to power through. You were having some technical issues. That's just adventure, though, right?
No, let me tell you, yeah, for sure. And just working through problems, one little step at a time.
That's all adventure is one. It's problem solving. It's problem solving usually through the sport, through the medium of a sport. But well, let me ask this: Is this your first podcast, or have you been on other podcasts?
I think it is. A couple other shows that do some live format. I've actually chimed in about
Called
different
in and
things.
Stuff.
Yeah, but nothing like this. No, full interview. I mean, I did some stuff, not a podcast, but my former job. I was actually I dealt with our media a lot, so I dealt with a little bit of the camera stuff for local news.
Okay.
So I'm somewhat comfortable with it, but yeah, first podcast officially.
Man, this is awesome. So we've been in communication, and I've been on the phone before a few times over the last, 5 years almost. I mean, how crazy is that?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, through your moves, and it's kind of, I think a lot of your followers probably follow you, when you've moved and you've had, a trial and different things. So you kind of feel like you really get to know someone virtually, if that makes sense. It's kind of different.
I was just listening to a podcast about that exact topic, is how you feel like you get to know people through media. And it started with TV and shows that had seasons that people felt like they knew these people. And I feel that way about a lot of the shows I listen to, and, listeners and folks that just stay in touch over the years. But man, when I took over this show, because this show is, for folks listening that might be new, I didn't start this podcast. I came in about 3 or 4 years when it got started, and then I've hosted it ever since 2018. And yeah, man, I was a kid then. I mean, I still am, but I had kids and I moved across the country, and a lot's happened. But what hasn't changed is just keeping the show going. And you've been there way before I was here, so
Yeah,
you've seen
it's
even more change.
no, yeah, but it's super funny because it was like a natural transition between who ran it before and then you. Like you
Yeah,
could
Kurt
almost
and
tell
Travis.
it was a really clean handoff. So even when you do, I guess you go back to certain shows when you kind of highlight when he had it, or
Yeah,
like you
every
replay them.
Thursday I do a throwback episode.
It's sometimes tough to figure out it's a different person. I mean, obviously your voices are a little different, but
Yeah.
the vibe of the show is the same.
Good, man. That's good to hear. And it was, it's funny. There's definitely a story there. And I'm not going to make, I try not to actually talk a lot during interviews, but this is such a unique one. It's good to actually finally meet too. So that's
Yeah.
like, we're catching up. Kurt and Travis, who hosted the show before, Kurt, who did most of the interviews, and that's a lot of who I throw back to on Thursday. The reason they stepped away from the show was because of doing the interviews. They were so inspired and like changed through talking to all these awesome people that they were like, I want to go do something. But
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do that, it took not hosting the show anymore, because it is a lot of time. It is a lot
Oh,
of
I could only
like
imagine. I could only
focus,
imagine.
a lot of nights and weekends. And I was, leaving that kind of 20s rambunctiousness and figuring what you wanted to do out and entering kind of that more stable, consistent, we're getting ready to start a family, and it was just like perfect timing.
Yeah.
And man, I will say they made it so easy. I'll never stop thanking them for the opportunity, because it was like they didn't have to do that, and they said, hey, we want the show to keep going, but we don't think we can host it with all the stuff we want to do. One of them, Travis, wanted to adventure full time, get an RV. Kurt wanted to move way into the mountains in Colorado, and they both have
Yeah,
done
he's in
that.
Gunnison area or
Yep,
something, if I
he's in
remember
the
right.
Gunnison. We
Right?
stay in
Yeah.
touch. I messaged him
Yeah.
last week. Gosh, this is awesome. So tell us a little bit about your story. How'd you get into this stuff? Where does it start, or where do you want to start with it?
Well, it's kind of wild because I've been kind of reflecting back on how it all kind of started. I had kind of a unique situation that I was working in a career after the military. I went into law enforcement, and I had two young children, and both my young children were playing like competitive sports and on the road all the time. So it was really difficult to kind of step away and do things. So once my son got out of sports and then was slowly getting into like the college years, so probably about 18, 19, and I actually think I corresponded with you about this a little bit. We were doing just a big hike. We would do an annual trip up to Montana. We'd pick a remote lake and we'd cruise up there in my little Honda Civic, just loaded down with paddle
That's
boards
awesome.
and everything else. And 90% of the trip, believe it or not, it wasn't necessarily about where we ended up. It was kind of the journey in between. So we did that for about 2 years. And then when it went to Banff with a couple paddle boards, California license plates, pulling in there with a lowrider Honda Civic, dispersed camping, because I get really good gas mileage. So it was just kind of fun. These people would be like, you guys drove that thing from California. And then of course we would be like, that was part of the funny story. And then we ended up on all different little trips in between based on what people would tell us. But we were on Mount Tollick, and for people that are in the Tahoe area, they'll probably correct my the way I just said that, because I've heard it mentioned multiple times. And we were coming down off like a 15-mile hike. It's the highest point of Lake Tahoe, and I saw a photo of it. And then basically it oversees the whole Lake Tahoe kind of basin, or all the way around. And it looks like you're in an airplane when you look down at that lake. And we were coming down that trail, and of course you're riding on endorphins. You just had a good hike. My son and I are having time together away from all the distractions you get at home. And we came across this guy that probably in his mid 70s. At the time I was probably about 48, 49. And we start talking, and he goes, oh, I just completed all the national parks. And I mean, I didn't even know how many national parks there were. I know kind of the general ones around your area, or all the popular ones, just that we all
Yeah,
know
you
from.
hear the big names, but you're not sure if
Yeah.
that's the whole list, or is
So
there
I
10,
was
is there
like,
100? Yeah.
correct. So I was like, I'm like, wow, that's pretty fascinating that you're able to do that. He goes, well, believe it or not, I got out of the service when I was around 20 and got married, and my wife and I made it a pact together that we're going to see all the national parks. And I go, oh, wow, that's amazing. He's alone, when he's hiking this. And obviously we're not in a national park. And he said she passed away after about 53 parks, and I did the remaining parks in her honor. So I kept walking, and I'm like, he kind of walked off, and then I thought the story was really amazing. I've like thought back multiple times to it, and I told my son, I'm like, here I am in my late 40s. I've seen only like 2 or 3 national parks. And then I started being like, like I have enough time that I could take advantage of more things. And so I made it a pack, like, okay, I'm going to see all the national parks. And I wanted to do it within like 2 or 3 years, which now looking back on it, you got to spend some time at the parks because each one has their own stories. But I've had the opportunity to hit a bunch of them. And in between, I find out a lot that some of the things in between are actually better than the national park I'm going to. They're all great, but you just never know until you visit some of the parks what you're going to see in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started doing that.
So, all right. So that guy had that influence on you.
Yeah.
You realize, well, there's at least 53. And I think there's like a total of probably at the time, 58 or something, 56.
Yeah. I think it's low 60s now. I think they just added
in the 60s.
one.
Yep. So I think
they keep adding them, making it more difficult for me because like, I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to get to America Samoa? Thinking on all
right.
These things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All the ones now are pretty, they're out there, or they're something like the St. Louis Arch or something where it's like, okay, I can see that, it's not like Glacier, but it's definitely a cool spot. Man, so that's a cool resolution, I guess. But what did your son think? Did he have any thoughts on it at the time, and was he enjoying these experiences with you?
I think he was, but like sometimes it takes certain unique kids to really have things like that resonate with them at that age because there's just so many things going on, and he knows, but my father passed away at 56. Okay. He was a retired police officer. He read books about everywhere. We owned a commercial fishing boat growing up. So Alaska always intrigued him. And then I would hear that through him.
Where was that, by the way?
That was actually, it's big now, believe it or not, but big compared to where we were. But in like probably like 70s, late 70s, we owned a commercial fishing boat out of Half Moon Bay, which is where the popular spot, Maverick Surf Spot. You see the big wave surfing. That's basically Half Moon Bay. It's right outside
with Half Moon Bay.
Yeah, and his ashes, and then his father's ashes, who was also like a maritime guy that was really in the ocean, are there also. So we kind of grew up around commercial fishing boats, and then my dad was also a police officer, owned a few boats out of Pier 45 in San Francisco, which is like if you go to San Francisco and you're going to Fisherman's Wharf, that's the area that like was the stomping grounds. My brother and I would just cruise through there at like 6 and 10 years old. While my dad worked on a boat, we would just mess around like at all the tourist spots. So this is a long answer to your question about my son. Appreciate it. But my dad died at 56. He had all these places he wanted to go. And it made my brother really realize that like, hey, we need to really take advantage of these opportunities because you just never know. He had a heart attack out of the blue, so everything changed. So we've really tried to.
How old were you?
So I was probably, I guess, mid-20s.
That had to be hard.
Yeah. So I got married. He saw me get married, saw I think either one or two. I think both children were born, but they had very little recollection of them. And I mean, I could share a photo offline with you about it, but I mean, he was like a total like legendary old school police officer that really embraced the whole community outreach and knowing everybody on his beat. His father was also. So I mean, I know that's not the point of the show, but I'm third generation police officer. My son's fourth now.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
Fourth.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Same city I left, and we actually rode my last shift together.
That's right. That is what. All right, let's take a quick side trail. What was that like?
And really, well, funny story about that is, so he got hired. I was raised around a police officer that didn't share a lot about work. Okay, I saw my dad in uniform probably 2 times in my entire life, and that was towards the end. I would hear stories because he and my grandfather would share stories about the good old days and like knowing different. San Francisco is very family oriented, so they tend to hire a lot of generations of cops, like nephews, cousins, brothers, sisters. So they would share a lot of stories about different siblings or whatever. So once I got hired, he attended a few things like my academy graduation and formal events. And then later on, he would start sharing more and more stories because now I'm actually on a job that he did. So there was a lot more common ground. But my son, I wanted him to really understand what was going on because law enforcement's going through some really unique times right now. So with all the technology and oversight and social media, everyone knows, all your listeners know that they see it every day on the news, different things, either for or against law enforcement. Well, I really wanted to let my son know what he was getting involved in. So I was pretty involved in some of the training, and I was actually, eventually I worked to a point that I oversaw our special weapons and tactics team, which is our SWAT team. So I would have him volunteer for like scenario-based training or outreach training regarding some of our charities that we worked with. So like active shooter training when you're dealing with like mass casualty incidents with applying tourniquets. I'd have him and a bunch of his friends play victims. So I really wanted him to know what he was getting himself into, in opposed to coming into something without. And he's like, wait, there's people that don't necessarily support us. In any job, it's the case. So I really wanted him to be in a good mindset, understanding what he's getting himself into, because it's a career and it's a commitment. And you got to know that not everybody likes you, but that's really any job. So he ended up getting hired. He got hired at a unique time, right during COVID and all that stuff. So any classroom atmosphere or thing when you're in close proximity, it's difficult to put on those type of training, whether it be academics, college, high school. That was a weird time, as we all know, because we've never dealt with it. So he ended up getting hired, went through our training program. I'm in my last 2 or 3 years at the police department at that point. And then I was coming up on my retirement date. It's a big deal, your last day with law enforcement, because they do like a drive-in with as much staff and family that could attend. And then you actually ride in together. You pull into a place where everyone kind of renders honor to you, like saluting. It's really awesome. I mean, you've attended like dozens of these through your own career. So when you're finally in that position, it's really surreal to finally be in the opposite side. Like you're actually now the recipient of all these people are being really cool and showing up in the morning to see you off, into the next chapter of your life. So he rode with me that night. But the side note story is I was pretty tight with the guy that I worked with, a sergeant, and he pretty fit guy. We always worked out together and do different things because we really started to embrace fitness as a at our occupation towards the end. And then they still are now, just because it's super important for the overall wellness piece. So I go, hey, John, that was the guy I was working with. I go, hey, I'm retiring here in a few weeks and I'm going to ride with Justin, as you know. I said, I've always wanted to run to work before. And we're working graveyard shift also. So you're sleeping during the day and you're working 12-hour shift, commuting 30 minutes each way, at least. You don't get out right on time anyway. So your window of sleep isn't real good anyway. I go, hey, John, you want to run to work that night? And he goes, I'm in, without even knowing mileage, training, anything. So we ran to work that night and then worked our whole 12-hour shift and then did the send off in the morning. And I rode with my son. He drove and I just kind of hung out with him all night. And then, we went to calls and do all the normal things police officers do. But instead of a partner that, is your day-to-day partner that you might have closer to your age, it was his dad cruising around with him.
You got to weigh all that and then, do the normal stuff. Was there anything on that day that was, anticlimactic, like, I had to go parking tickets or something like that? Just all that stuff was happening too, right? Or is your last day a little different?
So I was fortunate enough to get promoted, and eventually I retired as the watch commander. So we have a lieutenant, and then we'd have about, I don't know, anywhere from probably 6 to 12 officers, depending on what time of the night that people kind of shift in and out for overlap for your prime time. And we happen to be just one of those cars. So even if he wasn't in the car with me, as a manager out on patrol, you don't tend to go to all the calls, but the high priority calls, or if there's something of significance, like a missing child or something like that, where we want all the resources there to help, the more eyes on the street, the better, we would go to. But that night we just kind of cruised around and stopped in on calls. And of course it was my last night in uniform working with a lot of the people that I really cared about. So I was trying to like embrace that while kind of limping around after the 29-mile run on the way to work. So yeah,
I didn't even ask how far the
yeah, it's
run to work was.
29 miles.
29 miles. You
Yeah,
ran a marathon before work
yeah,
and some
kind of.
change.
Yeah, not real fast, but we did it. Yeah.
Dude, how'd your buddy do?
He did great. It's just such a cool thing. And I already told him, I said, hey, he's probably going to retire in like 8 or 9 years. And then I go, I'll come in and run with you again. I'll be about 60, but I'll be able to do it. We
Wow.
just won't be too fast.
There you
But
go.
it's cool. I mean, as you know, like a long hike or something where you really grind and go a long way, not only is it probably the really good things that make you reflect on what you did and accomplish, but there's just so many stories while you're chatting with a friend hiking that you've never really been able to kind of experience because we're all so busy.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. This episode is brought to us by Oris Watches. You know, a piece of equipment on any adventure that I'm honestly surprised by how much I use is my watch. And I'm wearing a watch right now. I always have a watch on. And I believe that you should check out Oris Watches. Oris is a 119-year-old family-owned independent watch brand based out of Hallstein, Switzerland. The brand has been certified climate and carbon neutral since 2021 and every year releases a sustainability report. Oris only makes mechanical watches like the new Pro Pilot X Caliber 400 and the new Pro Pilot Altimeter featuring a 3D printed carbon case. If you're a fan of mechanical watches like I am, there's nothing in the game that's better than Oris, and you can discover the full Oris collection at a retailer near you or at oris.ch. So if you want that one piece of equipment in your life to be functional, to be useful, to be beautiful, artistic, check out Oris Watches. Oris, go your own way. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. Man, I'm telling you, we have a new YouTube series over at Athletic Bruin called Take Two, where we do interviews on hikes, and the reasoning is because there's nothing that opens you up like going outside together and walking or running around or biking around. It just something about that change of scenery and that effort that just gets people thinking, it just opens people up. I think
Right.
It's such a wonderful thing to do. Go for a walk with someone that you kind of know or need to know more. And
Yeah.
whether it be your spouse or your siblings or someone, you're going to learn something new about them outside together. So you were able to retire. And
Right.
how long was the time between you met that old man in Tahoe and retirement?
That was probably about 2 years from retirement. So I started hitting all the national parks I would take 2 or 3 weeks off and then I would just do a road trip, originally in my Honda. And then I kind of built like an overland rig that I could kind of disperse camp out of. So I started doing all the local national parks. I did probably like California. I did all the California parks pretty much in one run. And that's where the paddleboarding came into. There's so many like little things that I figured out. Paddleboarding was at that time, the inflatable were pretty new. Okay. So like, meaning there's so many companies that are competitive in the space now, but I went to the Sequoia National Park and went to a lake down there and I was sitting on the edge of this lake. I backpacked in, it's about 10 miles in. And that was
carrying the paddleboard on your back.
Yeah, no, not yet. So it was my first like backpacking trip that outside of like a overnighter. Okay. And then my bad for going to REI and thinking that I needed everything on the shelf to carry, because about mile 2 or 3, I'm like, why am I carrying this chair or this towel? I mean, I was probably carrying 60 pounds of gear on an 8-mile hike for like an overnight. It's totally dumb on my part.
Gotta start somewhere.
Yeah. So I get out to the spot and then there was really no one on the lake. And I was on the edge of the lake, camping in a tent. And then I remember that night, like at sunset, I'm like, there's got to be a way to get out on that lake that I could carry something light. So I started doing a little research and I'm into fitness. Like if I'm going to do something water related, I'd rather get some fitness out of it, whether it be core or a workout. And I started researching paddle boards and then I got on some forums and then everyone was telling me this one particular brand who I actually do a little bit of work with now, Nixie, was like one of the lighter boards.
Mm-hmm.
And I could get an 18-pound paddleboard with an oar and a small hand pump into my whole set and run about 50 pounds with that, my food, and then last about 2 or 3 days to create like a base camp to do remote lakes. I would just go out to like the Eastern Sierra, create a base camp, go lighter with my paddleboard and deflate it and hit a couple, 2 or 3 lakes. And I'm the only person on a lake with nobody around. It's really cool, you know? Yeah. So that's how that kind of came about.
Dude, I'm a big time paddleboarder. I now that being back in Florida, there's so much water. I love it. It's just
Oh, I bet.
seeing the water, like looking down on the water is one of my favorite things to do. Seeing the animals and just the peace. It's like hiking, but on the water. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
That's what I compare it to. It's that kind of pace, that kind of perspective, and the way you do it though is so cool because I'm one of the only paddleboarders out in a lot of places I go, but only because everybody else is in a boat. So there's like tons of traffic. You, though, you're one of the only people out there. And then on top of that, you're probably the only person ever out on the lake this way because you're carrying it so far. So after that first experience, it sounds like you were onto something.
Yeah. Then I started doing some of the paddleboard trips and then kind of a hybrid national park, find lakes around a national park, not necessarily in them, but if I saw a cool lake in between where I was and my destination, I would like camp there or I'd paddleboard there. And then, I mean, just like yourself or anyone that listening, you just realize that there's so much in between. Like I would stop to get fuel and then someone would be like, hey, you got to check this out. So next thing you know, I thought I was going to a national park, but I'm doing like 2 or 3 side lake trips or camping trips.
Which can be better. Because
for sure,
hardly anyone's there. I mean, I don't know about you, man, but the older I get, I'm looking for those places that aren't on, bucket list A items for people. I want to be, there's a 14er over here. Well, let me go to that 13er on that side of the valley because there will be 1/100th of the people there. And it'll be the same view, same experience. I mean, it's 200 feet lower. Who knows any different? But anyway. Yeah. I'm sure those spontaneous trips were probably some of the best.
Oh, I think like when I went up north towards like South Dakota, North Dakota, Rushmore, all that area, like I grew up in the Bay Area and I didn't leave California much other than I lived in Alaska for a couple of years in the military. I went there to kind of experience what my dad used to always talk about from books, commercial fishing and that. But when I got to South Dakota, like Custer State Park and some of the little, like the Black Hills in that area, they get like no notoriety, like nationally, unless like people, and I had a buffalo right beside my Honda Civic that basically could have chewed on my mirror. It was like right there. And like people don't, and I was telling I'm in Texas right now on another road trip. And then a guy I'm with, he's planning on going up that way next year. And we're talking about like little secret spots. And I'm like, South Dakota is awesome. I mean, it's a great state. Yeah. And it's the people, when you leave your little day to day and wherever you live and the media and all the distractions, and unfortunately, a lot of it is just pushed at you so much. It's very easily to get influenced about what's going on in society, that when you step out, it really makes you realize like there's just so many like awesome people willing to help you out, whether it be like a trail angel on a mountain bike ride or someone that pulls over because they see you pulled over because you're lost. And it just makes you really get an appreciation for where we're at. And if you stay home and you watch your TV, you're not necessarily going to capture that. So I think getting away is a good reset for anybody, whether it's 100 miles from your house or a 2,000-mile road trip to the Midwest,
Did you at all have to learn that from your career as a police officer, or were you, because a lot of my friends that are cops, that like they talk about that a lot. So I didn't know if that was the case for you.
Yeah, not necessarily. Like the one thing that I have learned is I've always been in a very structured environment as far as schedule at work and contingency plans. If anything goes wrong, you're able to deal with it. And that's good and bad. You don't tend to wing it a lot. And I think going on these road trips and that, I think it's really forced me to get out of the schedule and then be flexible with your trip. And I think that's really important. It's funny, but I've applied a lot of the things I learned from either the military or law enforcement like little problem solving acronyms for like if I come to an issue. Like we just did, and you probably saw that. I think I tagged you in a photo and talking about micro trip. My cousin, who we're almost like brothers the way our family grew up. You think you know someone until you really traveled with them, right? So
Yeah.
so
Good and bad.
I'll get to that acronym in a second that I think is really helpful about like problem solving a trip. But so he flew. I drove from the Bay Area to Vegas. I picked him up at the airport. He works more of like a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job. He hops in my truck. Doesn't do a lot of these type of trips. We drive 4 or 5 hours to the Grand Canyon, right outside Mather campground there. We pitch our tents because we didn't want to break my rooftop tent in the middle of the night to, kind of mess everybody up around me. And we've been planning this trip for probably about a year talking about it. So, and then we did rim to rim. He did rim to rim, which was, 25 miles. And then I did there and back, which is, 49. But again, like he did that whole trip in like 36 hours, like flew in, picked up, get to the edge of the canyon, run 25 miles. He met a family on the other side. This is a part that I love about these stories. It's his birthday. He's got 3 kids, right? So he's leaving his family. His wife says to go find himself, making fun of him, right?
Yeah.
So we run this whole thing. We get to the other side, and then it's his birthday the day we're hiking it. So everybody's like all sweaty, filling up their waters. They're either going to turn around and do the next rim, or they're like loading up in their cars, which is a 4.5 hour drive to the other side, back to the south side of the canyon. Right. So we're all hanging out there, and I'm all, hey, everyone, this is my cousin. It's his birthday. So everyone starts clapping and everyone is supportive. Like, good job. You feel like you're racing, but you're not. Like, I'm just a 50-something-year-old guy trying to go across the canyon. So, and I go, oh, by the way, he needs a ride to the other side of the canyon. So he ends up meeting his family out of Utah who volunteers to give him a ride. They go and grab a cupcake out of a little convenience store on a gas break, and they're like singing to him in their car, happy birthday. He didn't know these people an hour before that.
Dude, wow.
But that's what I mean. Like, that's exactly like this, that the whole story wouldn't have existed if we didn't take this trip. And it made the story that much richer. If you have perfect weather, you get from A to B, everything works out. You didn't roll an ankle. You don't have any blisters. That really isn't a great trip. The great trip is when stuff starts going wrong and you figure it out and work through it.
You could write the book at this point on adventure. That's it. You're hitting everything that's like
not really your guests. I mean, I felt imposter syndrome even coming on here because your guests are doing some pretty incredible things.
No, man, that's I think that's a misconception about like the people I love talking to are people who love adventure and love to tell the stories. And that doesn't matter who it is. I don't know, I get asked this sometimes, your favorite interview ever. And a lot of times it's just one of the most recent ones, the one that just you made your hair stand up. Like you talking about that birthday cupcake, man, that's so cool. And like you said, it wouldn't have happened.
No,
because you think, how much can I really do in 36 hours?
Right.
I'm the worst offender of that, of anybody. And I talk to people like you every day. I'll be sitting with my kids and they'll want to watch a show for a little bit. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, I don't know, half the day's gone. Like, what's the point of doing anything the second half? But man, look what you can do in 36 hours. Look what you can do in 24 hours. You can fit so much into such a little amount of time without making it a super complicated thing. Just going out and doing something. Yeah. Going and sitting at that beach. Go to the lake and paddleboard for a little bit. Because you think you know what you're going to get out of it, but something unexpected always, always, always happens. You meet somebody, you run into an animal, you see something so cool. You see I was out the other night and I didn't even realize like a shuttle was launching. And then we were in the middle of the night camping, and then this shuttle went up, and I'm like, I'm so glad we're here to see this. This is so cool. Could have easily talked myself out of that trip. You know what I mean? Like, there's always something unexpected that makes it story worthy. I don't know. What was your friend's, what do you think it did for him?
Oh, I think for one, I think right away he wanted to do another. And even when I finished, like any of these things, and that's somewhat of a problem because you're always chasing that neon rainbow as far as like the ultimate experience. But like right when I finished the run, I didn't know for sure if he even had a ride when I left. I said, if I don't hear from you, I'm going to grab my truck and I'll drive around to pick you up, which is like, 4.5 hours. So I start coming up the north side, or I guess south side, and it's that last ascent, which Bright Angel Trail's a pretty steep trail. And I went into it with a lot of running. So I felt really confident that it was going to go well. And then I started getting text messages when I came off airplane mode from him saying, I found our campsite. I'm in the tent. I'm good, which just made me, finish the hike the next 2 or 3 miles, knowing he was in a good place, because I was like perfectly prepared to finish the run and then hop in my truck and drive around the other side to grab him, But yeah, so I think he realizes how much you can do in a short period of time. We're already talking about doing different things in the future. I love nothing more than having the flexibility to do these trips and having friends that don't have that flexibility to jump in a plane, meet me at an airport on the other end. I bring them to go experience it. They hop on a plane and they go home, and I could drive and keep going in between. You know what I mean? So I give them a snapshot of the experience without having to take all the days off.
Everybody needs a friend like that. I've got a friend like that. If he says, let's go do something, he won't let you come up with an excuse good enough to not do it. If you show interest, if it's like clearly like I'm getting married or, there's a funeral, that's one thing. But if you showed interest, he's like, you don't have a bike? I got an extra bike. You don't have this? I got this. You don't have that? I'll do that. I'll meet you there. He just makes it happen. And people need that, because a lot of times they don't even know what they're missing, or they don't know what they're maybe capable of. Sounds dramatic, but I think that's what it is. They don't know what they like. Wow, I can do this in this short amount of time. Holy, then they're off to the races. Their wheels start turning. You kind of help them break that rust off a lot of times.
It's super helpful too, like, because my wife understands, and it's a saying that I hear and I always think about. When you're on a trail, especially alone, you just unpack stuff all day. As you know, it's probably the best therapeutic thing you could do. And I always think like idle hands are the devil's workshop for me. So like if I sit around and I start looking at all the projects that need to be done, which they're always going to need to be done, or I'll start thinking of all the things that could get in the way of me doing things and making excuses. But once I'm out, it's almost recharging my batteries when I come back to be around my family, because I just experienced something. I'm on cloud 9. Last year we just did a trip, and I think you probably knew about it. We went to India to ride motorcycles through the Himalayas. Yeah. And it wasn't a matter of if I could do it or when I could do it. It's I'm going to do it. And she was totally supportive over it, and it totally worked out. And again, my buddy, who's like a total crazy adventure motorcycle guy who could like ride up the side of a tree. He's like super good motorcycle guy. I can ride a motorcycle. I'm just safe enough to not crash. You know what I mean? I'm very comfortable. I rode a motorcycle in the police department. I'm comfortable on a big bike, but I've never done dirt riding. So we fly over to Himalayas and everybody be like, hey, where are you guys staying? And we were part of a tour group, but we'd be like, I don't know. And then there'd be like, what do you mean you don't know? Well, what cities are you going to pull into? We're like, we don't know. And we knew a general idea of what was forecasted for our trip from the tour guide, but we intentionally didn't like do a ton of research because we wanted to experience it firsthand for the first time together. And all the little stories that happened were so much more fresh than if I would have done all kinds of research about where I was going. You got to be careful with that, because that could either make or break a trip, So anyway, that was a side note on that story, but that's a perfect example of like, it's not a matter of how I'm going to make the trip happen. It's how am I going to make it happen? So whether I got to work some side jobs, save some extra money because I don't like impacting my family money. If I could do anything, do some hustles on the side to create a little bit of an account to pay for these trips.
So take us through some of those things you've done to kind of structure your life to do this. You did retire, but it isn't like you're just set for life. It sounds like you still got to figure out how to make this stuff happen.
Yeah, so I worked a little bit when I retired at a sporting goods that I always went to. That also I had a charity event that I ran for several years at the police department. And they happened to be someone that partnered up with us for some things. And I like all their stuff. They're a small store. I think there's 11 of them in the Bay Area, Sports Basement. They offer all the stuff that you need to go on this type.
I'm familiar. I used to use them with Camp Crate, my last business. We'd ship boxes there. Man, you might have processed some of our boxes at some point.
Oh, shoot. Who knows?
That would be crazy.
I ended up working there, and then, for the discount, all the equipment, I ended up, going home with less money than I spent probably
Yeah.
at the store, which happens to that type of thing. But I would do that to kind of, and they knew some of the adventures that I had planned. So I would do that and some little side jobs, or just in general, I'd save up, my normal pension, and not do certain things to allow for others. So one of the main things from retirement, so I retired in 21, and I think you're familiar with this somewhat, but just to give people a perspective on me, I don't ride a mountain bike very much. I bought a really nice hardtail about 15 years ago that's probably got about 2,000 miles on it before all this happened. Okay. I would do little trips around my local area. The Bay Area has some awesome mountain biking. It's pretty much where mountain bikes started, Gary Fisher and up in the North Bay, Marin County. So I would ride a little bit, and I was doing these trips, as we talked about already, like national park things. And then my brother, who is an avid cyclist, has ridden all the way from Seattle down the coast with all the tour stuff. His bike looks basically like a small Honda with all the gear and stoves and, all that, I mean, he's one of those guys going down Highway 1. He'll try to bring friends and, ride a couple thousand miles and live off the campgrounds and write blogs about it. He's really good at it. Loved it. Well, he started talking about the Great Divide, and I had no idea what it was. And I'm like, hey, again, I don't ride a bicycle. I have a mountain bike, but I'm not a big cyclist. And he goes, hey, I'm thinking about doing the Great Divide when I retire. And then my brother's 4 years older than me. He has a couple kids. He was also a police officer in San Francisco when I'm over in the East Bay. And I said, hey, if you wait to retirement, when I retire, I'll go with you, without really knowing anything about that ride, by the way. Right. So he goes, okay, and he is super giving with all his equipment. He treats bikes like show cars. He fixes them up, flips them, and never is happy with the bike he has, because there's just so much out there that he wants to try out. Right. So he built up a couple Salsa Cutthroat. For listeners, the Salsa Cutthroat is basically the main bike for the Tour Divide ride. Like, it's the most common. I mean, they have the Tour Divide map painted on the bottom of a low bar on it. That just shows you that bike embraces the Tour Divide.
Yeah, it's built for it, baby.
Yeah,
it's
right.
You're in good hands out there.
So he gives me this bike, this carbon bike, more or less built for it. We start watching all the YouTube videos, following all the influencers that do the Tour Divide, from racers on to touring people. And we plan to do the Great Divide, right? So unfortunately, that particular year was towards the end of COVID. So I think that was the summer of 21. So Canada was shut down. So we're like, hey, we need to get to Canada. How are we going to do it? We ended up packing our bikes up. We rode a train for 22 hours, which unfortunately it's in the dark when you're going through all the beautiful areas. So we missed all so you're basically hearing all the rattles of a train and missing all the beautiful stuff that you would see during the day. But anyway, onward, right? So going into that riding, before that ride up there, I probably rode 5 or 10 times. Like, meaning I wanted to do a century ride just to say I could. So I rode 100 miles. I did some smaller things in between, but I wanted a little bit of foundation ride, because he's a good rider. And it's seat time. Like, if you haven't ridden a bike a lot, sometimes it's just get your legs familiar with riding and just pedaling, as you know, right? Let alone all the different things. So, and there's one of the books that I reflected on that trip a lot back. I think it's called Just Ride, and it's about a professor of kinesiology that did the ride. And there are so many little takeaways as far as nutrition, hygiene regarding like day to day, as far as so you don't get saddle sores. And I listened to it while I was riding, before I was riding, and after, meaning before the trip, during the trip, and after the trip, just because he's mentioning things and I'm seeing them pass, and it's so cool to hear his perspective as I'm experiencing those things. So back to that original trip with my brother Dave. He builds the bikes. We get up there. We start riding south. Right. It's going really well. We meet this really cool couple that's a couple teachers out of Spokane, Washington. Todd and Stormy. They've done the Great Divide before, so they were like, had all the little input that would help my brother and I, like where to camp, do different things. And we were just having like the time of our lives, away from your kids, just you and your brother, reflecting on stories you might not recall, or he recalls and you don't. And it was just really cool. Camping at night, going into towns, resupplying. So we're about 300 or 400 miles into it, I guess it would be. And we pull off at the little llama or alpaca or whatever farm. It's known, they're trail angels on the trail. I don't even want to say I don't want to say the wrong names because it wouldn't do them justice, but I think it's John and Laura. Anyway, they're the most awesome people. You pull in there and they don't want you to leave, which is bad if you're on a bike ride because you're
right,
trying to not.
You're tired.
But I mean, but like sandwiches, soda, water, all these little outbuildings they've created out of stagecoach stains and TPs that you could stay in for the night. Even the elite riders that win this thing make a point of stopping and hanging out there because it's one of the premier stops on the Great Divide. So we go in there with Todd and Stormy. We would split up, like I would ride with Todd, my brother would ride with Stormy. We would just chat about life, and they were really outdoorsy people. So they're like, hey, we can't stop here. We got to do another 20 or 30 miles. And we were doing about, I mean, some listeners, it's not a ton of miles, but we do anywhere from 40 to probably 70 miles a day, depending on, we're still building into the ride at this point, right?
Yeah. And
So
was that
Todd
the plan? Is that what you wanted to do, or did you
yeah,
feel behind?
we were almost following the book, and it's more of a tour pace.
I'll be honest,
and
man. That's the way to do it. It's so beautiful, and I feel like a lot of riders miss out by riding so much at night. You don't get to see a lot of this and experience it.
Yeah, and there's another piece to that too. That what I've realized, in cars, you experience life a certain way. On a bike, you experience it a little more because things slow down and you're able to process more. On an ultra like marathon run, when you're running 50 or 100 miles, it slows down even more. But if you're hiking, you're taking it all in because you have so much more time to process everything. So what I realized, the faster you go, the more you miss. So you might be doing it for like later on. I'll talk about that in a second, but the bike's a great way to experience things because you are kind of a minimalist. And I think the more time you take, the more experiences you have in between point A to point B, like stopping, checking out the sites. So that we left that farm, we were wanting to stay there. My brother and I, and my brother really wanted to because he follows all the, like, there's so much stories about that trail that he knows of them from all the people he follows. Oh, we got to hang out here tonight. Todd and Stormy are like, hey, let's do another 20 or 30 miles, and we're going to Helena, the capital of Montana, and we could get a shower and we could actually go to a dinner. And then we're like, well, the 20 or 30 miles, that's a little more than we planned, but we're do it because Todd and Stormy are a cool couple. So we start riding that way, and then the trip, I mean, it was going awesome. We were about a mile from town. We're following our GPS grid. As a lot of people are familiar with that, we had asphalt probably a mile away from us. And then I'm with Todd, and then we're just you're on the last couple miles of your day. You're just stoked to be able to go grab dinner in a shower. And Todd pulls up beside me and he says, hey, somebody just went down. So meaning either Todd or Stormy or my brother. And then I go, oh my God. And just me automatically, your older brother, you looked up to him your whole life. He's an avid cyclist. It's not my brother that went down. I'm just thinking at my head selfishly. And I'm not saying that I wished it on anyone else, but that's just what my mind was processing.
Yeah. Or that,
So
what was the level of urgency? Like, oh, someone fell, but I'm sure they're fine.
No, he said someone just went down. And then Todd's a very laid back guy in general. Both of them are like outdoor guides when they were in college, no first aid. They're not going to freak out over something. And he was startled what he's looking back at. So we were literally now a half mile from pavement, right? So we turn around, we're on a ranch road. We just went through like single track, not super sketchy stuff, but stuff that we had to really focus on. And at that time, we were riding heavier bikes, like 65, 70 pounds, and your bikes just don't react like a race ready 45 to 50 pound bikepacking bike, right? I mean, if you do something, it's going to magnify if you're on suspension, or it's going to magnify everything. So we turn around, I look, and I make the corner, and it's a dirt road, and it's just a yard sale of equipment. Like all the bags are everywhere, and we're everything's singed down. Like it takes a lot to pull those bags off our bikes. So I'm like, like the cartoon when you see the guy pedaling, but he's not going anywhere, like he's just screaming. So I'm riding as fast as I possibly can, and Todd too, beside me, to get back to them to see what actually happened. And we pulled up. My brother's laying there pretty much like dead still. He's got blood coming out of his ear, which we all know, out of your head, that's where blood can come out. So I'm thinking really bad things. By this time, I mean, I got 25 years law enforcement. I was in the Coast Guard. I dealt with search and rescue. I'm very familiar with like protocols and contingencies. If something goes down, we're now having to work the problem, right? Stormy's got her arms around his head, protecting his neck, because we're thinking broken neck just based on what we're looking at. Thank God I had cell reception. So I called medical. I told them where we were right away. They told us, hey, you're at such and such. I think it's pre-grade. We'll have people on their way. We're 45 minutes to an hour for medical to get to us, right? My brother's kind of going into shock just because, just looking at him, he's not himself. Anybody would, right? Because his body's now making all of its priority to deal with the injuries that are there, in opposed to conversing with us. Thank God an ambulance happened to be cruising through the area that hears that radio call come out to their dispatch for all the volunteer fire crew up there. And they're like, hey, we're on our way back from Butte, I think it was. We're closer than any on-duty rig. We're off duty, but we're going to swing by to help these folks, hearing what we put out, like our distress call. They get there, get my brother comfortable. And then I used to have, like, volunteer firefighters are awesome. Like, I mean, there was so many people that probably dropped their barbecue dinner with their family to go help us during that time. Like, meaning we had so many trucks there. It was probably more than an urban city has. Like, people's personal F-150 pickups with all their gear that they come from home to start helping my brother, getting our gear to their firehouse overnight so we could get him to an ICU or a trauma center. Anyway, he goes to the trauma center, has all the CAT scans, all the scans done on his body once we get him to help, and starts getting treated. We get him comfortable. I'm sure people that follow the show probably want to know his injuries. He ended up having a few broken vertebrae in his neck, clavicle, scapula, wrist, and I think he had 6 broken ribs.
What happened?
So what happened is we found a pretty good chunk in his tire. And what we think happened is he hit something in a road, because it's a ranch road. So stuff falls off trucks and metal objects and that. But it was about a pencil-sized puncture on a tubeless tire we run. So basically his front tire got punctured and bled out so fast, not like a traditional leak, that his front tire basically washed out from underneath him, and his bike disappeared without him even able to react. He didn't know it went flat that fast. So the bike disappears.
The front tire basically burst. And
correct.
That loss of pressure
Instantly
dropped the bike almost out from underneath him that quickly.
And 70 pounds of gear, unless you're
kind of
perfectly
halted. It basically came to a stop, and he kept going.
Correct. Gosh. And he happened to be wearing a backpack.
So he's got even more weight.
And you know what? I mean, we went to that. If you would have saw us going on that trip, you would have thought we were like deploying to Africa for a 7-month safari. I mean, we had so much stuff, and then his backpack was heavy, and we almost think that his backpack, and people could ride like they want. I mean, I later on did other things, and we'll get to that in a second, but I later rode with just a fanny pack. I didn't wear a camel pack or a vest, hydration vest, anything like that, because they had to cut his backpack away from his shoulder, because when we think that he rolled, we think that shoulder hit the backpack, and all the weight in the backpack actually forced his body's going one way, the backpack pulled against it, and we think that's what broke his shoulder. So yeah, so we kind of rethought gear after that. So I get him home, meaning to the hotel. I get him to the hotel. Todd and Stormy come to the hotel. I stay in their room. We didn't know these folks 5 days ago, and now they just experience like a life-changing experience where they almost saw one of their friends die, including me, right? Like meeting my brother. And then they're like, we can't continue. They started to ride the next day once they knew he was okay and on the mend in the ICU, and they started to ride and they started to have tears in their eyes because they're like, we can't leave not knowing if he's okay. I mean, how is that? We're going to do another 30 days to finish to the south end and wonder how he was. So they rode back to the hospital, visited us, hung out for a couple days, and went home. So we got him home. I should say, okay, he had no surgery. I mean, that's incredible. All those injuries I told you, like, it was all natural healing and him just gutting out his bones, healing themselves. Like everything was.
Is that a choice? Was that a recommendation?
They didn't require surgery for his neck. His wife went up there, got him home on a plane. We were looking at potential like chartering a plane because, I mean, he wasn't moving around pretty good. You could just imagine his body just basically took some huge injuries based on impact.
Holy cow, man! That's the worst injury I think I've heard about on the Tour de Dubai.
We've heard, and then if it wasn't for his helmet, and to speak about a little bike safety, he had a golf ball size rock embedded in his helmet. So if he didn't have that rock would have been in his head. He would have died for sure. So even the firefighters are like, the firefighters, I think, kept it, and they're like, this is the best safety thing for cyclists in the area. And then I think Dave, my brother, actually reached out to the actual company to tell them how good their helmet did after it. And I don't remember exactly what brand it was, but so I get him home, get him situated. I fly home, and then I'm like, man, I got 30 or 40 days of open time. I was planning on being on the road. He's okay now. His wife, he's healing. Okay. It's only thing that's going to help him is time. Okay. Like being at home. So I go, I really like the San Juans. I heard from Todd Stormy that there's a ride called the Colorado Trail. Man, I should do the Colorado Trail. And I go, but my bike that Dave, my brother, built me it's got a fixed front suspension. The Colorado Trail is a little more of a hardtail full suspension ride. So I go, I'm going to drive to Durango. So I drove to Durango. These are all little side stories that were none of my plan. I drive to Durango. I talked to the U-Haul folks. It's like this little like tow yard deal. I go, hey, can I rent a U-Haul, leave my truck here, put my bike in this U-Haul, and I'm going to go to Denver to start this race or ride, and ride from Denver to Durango. It's like a 500-mile ride.
That's such a good idea. Rent the U-Haul truck, put everything in the back.
Yeah, and then
just drop it off in Denver.
And I left my pickup truck at the U-Haul yard. They charged me a little like holding fee. It's in a cage with cameras on it, so I felt good about it. So I get to the other. I drive the U-Haul the other end, and I haven't been to Colorado in this capacity that much. And then I started running low on like finding a campsite because I'm driving to the other side of the state to start, right? So I'm like, I'm driving. I don't want to get myself in trouble on this, but I'm driving and I'm like, well, I'm in a U-Haul. I'm passing a U-Haul yard, which is not the place that I'm returning the U-Haul to, but it would be real easy for me to go over there, after hours, which it was dark, back in like I'm one of the ones that's there just staged to do U-Haul stuff for the next day. And I opened up the back, roll-up door. I'm on a bikepacking bike. I have everything I need.
And you've got a ton of room back there.
I basically made that little U-Haul trailer or truck into my cabin for the night, slept till morning on the other end near, I think it's Waterton or Denver side. And then pulled out of my U-Haul yard before they open, like I was sleeping on the floor of the U-Haul in my sleeping bag. Right. So I returned the truck as if, I'm like, oh yeah, I just went straight from there to here and I'm returning it after I slept in the yard halfway in between. And then I rode from the U-Haul yard to the trailhead, took a couple of photos on the Denver side, and I started riding the Colorado Trail.
That is such a great story.
Yeah,
that's resourceful. Two, great idea with the U-Haul in the first place.
Oh, it was awesome. It was awesome.
that was probably a first for a lot of the people that maybe processed that if you told them. And that was probably also a first, someone thinking that and saying, well, I'm just going to camp right here. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it makes
Oh,
perfect sense.
it was and it was quiet. There's no one around a
Oh,
U-Haul
yeah.
yard at night. So I start the Colorado Trail. I start riding that. I didn't do it fast, and this is now
It's a
you
hard
think about.
trail. It's a
Yeah, and
really hard trail.
and it's high elevation. So you
Yeah.
think about it on that ride is I only got about maybe lifetime 500 miles under my belt, and I'm now taking on the Colorado Trail.
Which is
Uh,
500 miles.
yeah. So I
Well,
start
can
doing
I
all,
ask this?
yeah.
What did your family or your wife or anyone around you have, or yourself have second guesses about going back out there after seeing your brother almost die?
What to go do that course?
What to go do anything to keep
Yeah,
going?
uh, not no. As far as me without him, no, I didn't.
Or anyone
Just
saying, "Hey, he just almost died.
yeah.
You shouldn't
No,
go. Like, don't go. That's dangerous."
no,
Good.
not at all that. If anything, I felt a little bit selfish. I want to make sure my brother's okay before leaving.
Right.
That was the only thought that
And that
I
there's
know he's at
nothing else
home.
you could do.
No, everything he's home, he's situated. And luckily, I think my wife has a pretty good confidence in me in doing things that it's going to work out. Anything can happen, but like I said earlier about like an acronym to work problems before, so it's called PACE. So PACE is primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. So if you have any situation at hand, whether it's a scenario today that you're going to have a problem with a flat tire, or it's riding a Colorado Trail, or running rim to rim to rim, right? Your primary mission is to complete it, right? Well, things are going to come up. There's going to be there's going to be fire restrictions going through certain areas, so you're going to have to take alternate routes. There might be flooding if in New Mexico during like monsoon season, all that, right? So the primary is getting to the place. The alternate is if things come up, how are we could alternate or deviate from our plan. The contingency is what is your plan. So your contingencies are now going to be like, I carry a GPS. I now carry life flight insurance. Those are people that don't do that. I did not know to do that. I never tested my Garmin or InReach or excuse me, Garmin InReach or Spot or whatever people carry, because there's so many companies competitive in that space now. But if you never actually physically tested it before you leave, that's a big gamble, because you don't know for sure if it even works. So they allow you to test it a few days out from a trip. They do a test run, and then so I did that for the Colorado. To answer your question, any worries about people? I think they know that I have a lot of contingencies regarding mechanical stuff on my bike, water, filters, all that type of stuff, that I'm prepared for an emergency. So PACE, contingency, emergency is when you're basically, calling for help, like a Mayday or a search and rescue, or going to a local store to say, hey, can I get a ride wherever,
I'm writing that down. I love that acronym.
Yeah. Your primary mission or priority, same difference really. Your alternative. So like, meaning if things have to deviate, sometimes things are out of your control, but you just got to work with it. Kind of what we talked about. And that's half of the fun, figuring the problem out. Contingency. So if you're on an alternate plan, what are the contingencies you have to make that successful? So like, whether it be different means for your bike, equipment. So like right there, alternate. Your primary mission is getting to the location. You hit major storms, you're in the snow. Well, what are your contingencies for that? Well, I got a puffy jacket, I got a shell, I got a bunch of merino clothing that will keep me warm. I got a space blanket. And then, wow, that didn't work. Now I have an emergency. So I have this Garmin InReach. I'm in the middle of nowhere without cell service. I could message my family, or I could, worst case scenario, push the emergency thing to help myself or others that experiencing like, a catastrophic incident, really,
You got your brother settled. Why not continue on the Tour Divide versus the Colorado Trail?
For one, logistically, it's a lot harder to get to for the start. A little bit of me had to go back and start from the beginning might have been an option. I'm definitely not going to leave from the hospital to continue just because I want to make sure he was okay. And there's a little bit, and he and I talked about this a little bit, because I don't want to, I didn't want to do his dream without him. His dream was ride the Great Divide, and I was just tagging along. Colorado has always inspired me, that area, and that's like the next best thing, because my favorite thing is the mountains. The desert's nice, but I just love being up in the mountains. I love the San Juans, which are obviously down towards the Durango side. And I just
Man,
love.
you did the Colorado Trail the right way too. I mean, that's the way
Yeah,
to do it.
I think so. I think so. And I met people along. I met an 80-year-old hiker on. He even said, "This is probably my last hike on the Colorado Trail." He's in his mid 80s alone out there, and he's carrying an ultralight setup. And he goes, "If it wasn't for the ultralight community that are creating all these like options for us, like, what would have been a 45-pound pack in the 80s and 90s, he's able to get by with like 25 to 30 now."
Oh yeah.
He goes, "If it wasn't for this equipment, I wouldn't be out here right now." And he said, "My wife said this is the last trip I could probably do just because of my age." He's hiking over 500 or 500-ish miles at 80 years old alone. Yeah, I finished that one. It took me quite a while because I had I learned little things along the way. I had hydraulic brakes. I had a leak. Apparently from the mechanics, air bubble and hydraulic brakes in the mountains is a bigger air bubble because you're at elevation. I don't know if that's true. That's what they told me. So I was running a single brake for 3/4 of the ride until I could get mechanical brakes put on it. I had everything swapped out. It's an old bike. My bike was like 15 years old at this time.
I love that.
Right. I don't want to get the guy in trouble because he's out there. But so I follow this Far Out app, and people are probably familiar with it. I think it's called Far Out. I'd have to look, and we could look, but it basically has all kinds of little information along your route, and like people have a lot like a live forum that like, "Hey, Mason was here. There's a water supply. Great trail angels. By the way, there's a bike mechanic at mile 22." So I look at that and I'm like, well, Lake City's my next stop tomorrow, and there's apparently a bike mechanic that runs a shop out of his garage. So he swapped all my brakes, and my bike was completely fixed. And if it wasn't for this app and knowing that someone posted to help me out, who's 2 days out from getting there or a day out, I wouldn't even have known it existed. He got me back operational, and then I got back to the trailhead and continued.
Wow, that's cool. That is really cool. No, I've actually never used Far Out.
Oh, it's incredible. Like, I mean, like it's crazy, Mason, because it's kind of like a video game. Like you're doing a really hard thing, but it's almost like you're playing a video game, because I'm 100 miles out. Let me look at the app. What's in the next 100 miles when I'm in my tent ready to go to bed? And I start clicking on all the water caches. It's almost, again, the water caches, if you're playing a video game, it'd be like if you're playing like Mario Brothers and you're jumping off a mushroom, you're getting points. So like, okay, there's a water cache. Good. Okay. I'm resupplied on water. There's a note on there, and that's a different trail. So I'll talk about that in a second. But so I finished the Colorado Trail. On the Colorado Trail, I start hearing about the Arizona Trail, and they're like, "Hey, you should do the Arizona Trail." I know nothing about the Arizona Trail, right? And they're like, "If you do the Arizona Trail and you go back and do the Great Divide, that's a triple crown of bikepacking." Again, I got like 500 miles total riding in my life, maybe 700 once I finished Colorado Trail, right? So I'm like, I should do that. So every night at the tent, yeah, I'm worried about Colorado Trail, but I'm researching the Arizona Trail while I'm on a Colorado Trail. And then I'm like, I was doing that in August, right? The Colorado, which is a good time. And I go, wow, it looks like the Arizona Trail it's October, the race, like, I mean, I'm not racing, but that's obviously the optimum time to be on the Arizona Trail between monsoon and heat. You're avoiding a lot of the different things that impact that ride. So sure enough, I finished the Colorado Trail. I get home, I tell my wife, I got to go back to this sporting goods for a couple months, make some cash. And then I start driving out to Arizona to do that one.
Right after. So
couple months, like 2 months.
Okay. So you do so for doing them so close together, what were some of those differences, those major differences?
Man, well, first of all, that Arizona Trail, they call it a trail. I happen to follow a monsoon season, which was unprecedented weather they had before that year. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. People that are listening that have ridden it, that are cyclists, are going to say that's not that hard. To me, a new cyclist, the weather conditions carrying so I get on the north side, I get to the trailhead. Awesome story about the trailhead. One of my backpacking paddleboard stories. I know this guy, an outfitter out of Page, Arizona, right there, that's giving me a ride in the past to paddleboard Horseshoe Bend. We're like kind of friends now, right? And we correspond on trips, and he always like checks in on me or whatever. I go, he lives near the trailhead, like a couple hundred miles. So I reach out to him. Has nothing to do with the fly fishing service he does out of Lee's Ferry down there. Because yeah, I'll give you a ride to the trailhead. Drives my truck to the trailhead, drops me off, gives little, bro hug, good luck, have fun, and drives my truck back to his house. And this is just someone I met on a past trip. So anyway, right, what are the differences, you ask? And doing right after another ride, there's a lot of hills and mountains in Arizona. Did not know that. It gets really hot in Arizona. That particular year, there was a ton of snow. 30, 40 miles into this ride, my rear derailleur gets caught up in a bunch of muck from snow, like just between ice and slush, and basically jammed my derailleur in a point it wasn't operational, bent it out from like the hanger, right? So now I'm a single speed, and I'm about 50 miles from Flagstaff, right? So I'm now doing back to the little circus bike thing and like one of the like super quick gears. I'm going like nowhere, but I'm pedaling really hard. So a couple zip ties, I zip tie the derailleur to my frame, got my chain to still operate. And then I rode to a bike shop, that ended up repairing it. But prior to doing this, I had to go to the Grand Canyon. As you probably know, and a lot of listeners probably know, the Arizona Trail, you can't go in the Grand Canyon with your bike rolling. So you got to break down your bike. You got to build your.
You can carry it on your back.
Yep, correct. So I wasn't really riding that fast anyway, because I'm on a single speed at this point. I break my bike down. I leave like 9 a.m. in the morning. I build this little backpack with a bunch of the ski like Volt straps, whatever they call the rubber straps, onto my pack. Have it situated with this bag that I brought one way, planning on the other end I was just going to throw it away, and then go back to my bike packing gear. So I had a larger backpack, put all my bike packing stuff inside of it, took my bike apart, strapped it to my bag, and now I'm hiking the Grand Canyon 9 a.m. from the north rim to the south rim, right? That was my goal. So I start doing that, and man, a bike packing carrying rig in your garage works really good. But when you're actually on a trail and you start dealing with other hikers, narrow bridges, narrow trails, the shifting of your bike, the chafe marks on your body. So I'm seeing all these ultra runner people, like this thing that my cousin and I just did last week, and I'm passing those people, and they think you're half nuts because they don't even know this ride exists. The race is running northbound at this point too. They're riding northbound. I'm riding southbound or carrying my bike southbound. So we're eventually going to pass the racers, right? Like the elite of these type of races. So I carry it all the way across the canyon. I get, it's actually right about the time we are in right now, meaning late October. And I get to Phantom Ranch. It's a ranch that you and your family could ride mules down to stay in these cabins. It's really a cool experience. Beautiful spot. It's like at an episode of one of those adventure shows, the experience that you get by doing it with you and your family. You got to book it a couple years out. But I'm like, I'm not going to make the canyon at light. I'm running out of light that day. And then I'm like, but there's a campground down there. And but you got to get a permit before you even go down there. But I'm like, oh, there's a ranger down here, and maybe I could tell him I'm struggling a little bit, and I would love to stay at this campground, and I'll pay whatever I need to if there's anything available. So I'm like, Phantom Ranch has this little like snack bar set up that they have a window that you sell ice creams and different things to people in the area. And you're remote. You're like, 10 miles away from a parking lot. So I'm out there, and there's this deck, and you and I have never talked about this story. So there's this deck with a couple picnic tables, and I see a bunch of rangers, and I'm like, phew, I found them. I was knocking on a ranger door at their little hut, and they were obviously doing their rounds at the campground and checking everybody's passes. So I see 4 rangers, and I'm like, thank God. And I'm not even processing stuff well. Anyone that's like pushed their limit, you're just kind of in a daze, like your ability to process like things is just different. So I'm on my last wit, and I talked to this ranger and I go, hey, and I'm looking at these rangers and they look, they're wearing khakis. They got the little thing like almost like a Boy Scout, that little bandana tied around their neck. They got like the hats. They got badges. I'm a former cop. Okay, I could know when people are legit or not. I think. And I go, hey guys, I need a pass for that campground up here right ahead. And the one guy looks at me, and he's got like a cheesy mustache, like almost like a Reno 911 mustache, right? And then they all look at me. They all look at each other. They all start laughing. And I'm like, I could tell I'm part of a joke right now, but I feel dumb because I'm not recognizing it. They're like, hey, it's Halloween. These are all costumes. We're not rangers. So now, like, I don't think the joke's very funny. I do now, but at the time, I, of course, was like, dude, I'm just looking for a campground tonight. Like now I got to find a ranger. And I told them what I was doing, but I thought that was a funny side note story that just 4 buddies that do an annual trip wore ranger costumes into the Grand Canyon to go camp. Like, who does that?
I know.
Right.
They're probably asking you the same thing though.
Oh yeah.
Who does that?
Like,
who's
probably
walking across the Grand Canyon with a bike on their back.
So I ended up finishing and asked you the difference between trails, man. Like once you get on the other side of Grand Canyon, I went to a bike shop. I had my bike all completely reworked as far as the cassette, the derailleur, all that stuff. Everything was running good at that point, heading south. The cat claw, which you probably know what it is. It's this plant in Arizona that, I mean, it doesn't matter how good I wrapped up. I have scars from it, like rolling through there because the monsoon really made that stuff grow that year. And it was almost grabbing you off your bike. I mean, I felt like that. Like it was like scratching into your skin because it really narrow roadways or trails, Thank God for GPS, because I would get audible tones that I'm off trail and I haven't went anywhere. I'm looking ahead and I'm like, I have not went off a trail. And then sure enough, I look at the little breadcrumb I'm supposed to be following. I roll 20 feet to my left or right, and then I'm back on trail again. So like without technology, it would have been very difficult for me to stay on that trail.
Just hard to tell where it is.
Yeah, you don't even realize you're on a trail at certain points. Like if it wasn't for that far out app, like resupplying for water, I went 3 to 5 days sometimes without water because I'm not that fast. That's the advantage of being a fast rider, is they roll from A to B much quicker. So they're getting to the water sources faster than, me. One of the little notes, I get to this water source and then I read the note from that app. And then like a guy like you, like, he went through there yesterday, writes a description on how I use, it's a cow trough with a float system out of a toilet, like the float, the old school toilet with the little plastic ball and it rises. That's how they operate to do the self-fill for this cattle trough. But the little mechanism to lift that wasn't operational. So I had one leg doing one thing, an arm with a stick lifting the float to fill my, I have a water filter, the Kaden or whatever it is, that water filter to fill my bladder to squeeze this like green water that cows live off, to fill my bag, to push it through my straw or my strainer or my filter to give me a fresh water source. But if it wasn't for like Joe Smith, who went there yesterday and says, oh, by the way, grab a stick, use your left hand, lift the float, it's going to kick in the mechanism which will flush this water and create, it's going to basically create pressure because there's a little like pump, and then I could fill my water. But if it wasn't for other people that went through the trail ahead of me to help, I'd have had to figure it out. It's a well. It's not something that I could just drop my thing into the sump and fill my bladder. You know what I mean? I needed a pump. So anyway, so I finished that trail, the Arizona trail, and that was, it was epic. Arizona is way more beautiful. Also a lot less forgiving than I anticipated. Those 2 trails are 2 of the hardest things I've ever done. The photos, and I don't know if you're sharing any photos on this or anything, but like the Arizona trail photo carrying a bike through the canyon, I look at that all the time because to every bad spot on a trail, there's a good spot. In life, if there's low spots, there's high spots, right? So if you're going through some adversity, you're having a challenging time right now, from the trail and these experiences have told me there's always light at the end of the tunnel. So the worst day of my life, not life, this isn't, I'm not going to die. I could have pushed the SOS button, had a helicopter there. And so, but the worst part of the trail that I had was that Grand Canyon experience. It was followed by the best part of that trail, because I started to continue hiking after seeing those rangers. I didn't get a campground. I laid against the side of the canyon going up Bright Angel, or I think it was South Kaibab that year that we finished with. I called my wife saying, this is absolutely stupid that I tried this. I'm way over my head. She, of course, says, hey, you say this on a lot of things, you're going to be fine. Right. Right. I mean, it's just another challenging thing.
Man.
But going up that trail at sunrise, there's no better way to see the Grand Canyon than when the sun's coming up and all the lights changing, all the animal life coming to life.
Imagine.
And that photo that you see is like 2 miles from the trailhead from me finishing. And I look back on that, and kind of what I said, that was a super low point of that ride, but it was followed up by a high point, because next thing you know, I'm experiencing a whole different thing. It's no different than moods, right? You're in a good mood, a bad mood. And I find on the trails, like I'll ride through a desolate area that might be super ugly. And then next thing you know, you're 2 miles, you're in one of the most beautiful parts of the trail, and I think of that as life, and there's highs and lows. So just know that if you're on a high, just understand something around the corner is going to be a low, but there's probably going to be another high right behind it. You just got to navigate the storm,
And I love hearing that even you, super experienced cop, badass, doing all this cool stuff, still call your wife to say, I don't know what I'm doing. I got in way over my head, because I do that almost every trip. If we talk on the phone during the trip, that's the tone. That's the feeling.
It's funny that you say that too, is like a lot of people are like, well, you could give up on any goal at any given time. I don't necessarily have, so back to that acronym, I don't have really options in that unless it's the emergency piece. All what I know is it's going to slow me down. I got to figure out the problem. I got to work the problem, and it's going to take longer. Like, I'm not a racer. So I'm not like one of these guys or girls that are trying to race like a individual time trial or the fastest known time. So I know I have the flexibility schedule wise that if it takes me an extra 10 or 15 days to go get my bike worked on, to let my ankle heal or do different things. So I'm very fortunate to have that. But if I created outs along the way, and then hey, Mason, I know you live 2 miles from the trailhead. If I'm not feeling good when I, cut through Silverton, Colorado, I'm going to call you and come get me a ride. I do none of that. You know what I mean? I can do that. I could call for an emergency from a local person to give me a hand, I'm sure. But I really try to create no outs, emergency outs, but not contingencies for me just giving up on myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's going to be bad days on any trail, even the elite riders.
Do you have to fight the desire to call it?
I honestly can say I never thought of giving up on any of those rides. I thought that it was going to take me way longer than it did, but I never thought okay, this is enough. I've said this. There's a video that I came across some people. Was that the Arizona Trail? I don't even know what trail I was on. I was on I think it was the Arizona Trail. Yeah, I came across this videographer couple, right? And they were out there doing a documentary of some sort, and they interviewed me, and it's on my Instagram. I think you might have either seen it. And they asked me about things. And to be honest, I think half of the reason I don't quit on things is I quit things, a handful of things as a child. And I look back on those all the time and how they haunt you, not like but like there were very simple things that I didn't have to give up on. And I think they made me more of who I am, because if I didn't have failures in my background, I don't think I would chase things as hard as I do. So I know I don't want to quit things. And what kind of example is that for me to my children, if every time that I have an out, I take the out or the easy route out. So I'm always mindful of that. And my brother's thing, he had to stop, right?
You have an that's injury. Life or death right there.
Yeah. But some of the other things that if you could just take a week off or do something and you have the means financially and your family's okay with it, it's going to sit a lot better on the other end of the trail if you know that you just took a little while longer and you just continue to push. They asked me that, and they said, well, what makes you want to do these types of things? And I said, and they interviewed me, and I said, I just quit some things as a child that I look back on, and I'm like, why did I quit that? And I wish I either had someone with me to push me harder through it, or I just didn't quit in the first place. But without those failures, I don't think I would succeed as well as I do now in life.
Mm. Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. I love that. And that's, I often talk about one of the best things my mom ever did was made me keep playing basketball when I clearly was terrible at it and thought, I don't want to do this. She wouldn't let me quit, and that's probably the best decision she's ever made for me, that is. And I constantly thank her for that moment, because it really taught me that, because what on the other side was that is I got really good and ended up loving it, and that's like my favorite sport, and played in college.
Oh, how funny.
That would not have happened had I done what I wanted to at an immature 14-year-old, just thinking, oh, I don't like this, I'm not very good, of course I should quit, not really knowing the repercussions of that later in life, whereas she did and said, no. And I want to hear, you ended up finishing the Tour Divide.
Yeah.
What was the story there? How'd you get back to that?
I'll give you a quick glance at it. So basically, I started to want to do because I wanted to do the Triple Crown now. I didn't know what it was.
The Triple Crown, like you mentioned, the Tour Divide, or Great Divide.
All 3 rides.
Colorado Trail, Arizona Trail.
Yeah, and then they say it's even more unique if you do it all in a calendar year. And I was on the Tour Divide when it would have been a calendar year. So I was like basically an extra week. So I reach out. I want to carry a tracker because I'm riding alone at this point, right? So I get a hold of the tour director guy, and these are the most awesome races because like I can meet the first place guy from Europe and he's going to stop and BS with me on a trail for 15 minutes about life. Like there's not many sports like that. It's awesome.
It's very humble. The people organizing it, everyone is accessible, So
I reached out to him and I said, hey, I want to carry a tracker. It's going to be an individual time trial. I know that the racers just went out 2 or 3 weeks ago. He goes, okay, well, what's your timeline? Again, my brother and our timeline was like, 45, 60 days, whatever. We were touring, we were cruising, right? I go, oh, okay. So I'm fudging my numbers a little bit just to kind of sound like I'm somewhat legit. I go 40 days. And he goes, oh, 40 days. He goes, we consider that fast touring. And I go, oh, okay. 30 days. And he goes, 30 days. Okay, you got it. So they do your little bio on the tracker sheet, right?
That's right.
Track leaders.
Yep.
And it says 30 days for me. That means I got to ride a lot, right? So anyway, I started riding south, and I eventually started like hitting some numbers that I averaged about 100 miles a day. And then I finished in 28 days. Yeah, which is pretty good. I mean, it's good for me, but those elite riders are like sub 20, and you know what I mean?
I think the winner, I think the record's like 13 days.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, a couple
insanity. I can't even fathom.
It is. But what's cool about it, what other sport can you do the same thing the elite people do and kind of put yourself up against them? And there's so much information out there to do it. And that's what's good about the Tour Divide. Like, I mean, if you go down that rabbit hole, there's so much information to research that will help you out.
So from my understanding, so you went back and started the Tour Divide all over again,
all the way from Banff. That's where we ran it. Yeah, I did the first couple 100 miles with a buddy, and then I continued to rest. We came across I think 5 grizzlies, 2 mountain lions, three black bears.
Mountain lions?
Yeah, oh yeah, I saw them alone, and again, it was late in the day. And you talk about, I hear you talk all the time about like, what did you see on the trail, and other podcasts too, that like people hallucinate as they get later in the day. You just, this one, I knew that it was, I think, a mom and 2 cubs. And then the way they moved, it was right by Holland Lake in Montana.
Is there a little resort there? Not a resort, but
yes,
like a little,
very
close.
Camp
on the grass.
Yep, a lodge.
I know exactly. I camped on that grass one night. I'm laying there. I think that's like one of the first nights into the Tour Divide, And I'm laying there, beautiful moon. There's a waterfall on like the other side of the lake. And it was
we've been there. Yeah.
it was pristine. We had dinner in that lodge. And
Yeah,
go
that
ahead.
lodge we rode so hard to get to it. We're like hamburgers, French fries, shake. We're just like looking forward to it. Like mile 50, my brother and I, before the crash ride, we get there, closed for the season.
Dang.
Yeah, I know. So now we're eating tortillas and salami and like peanut butter. But yeah.
Well, man, we had it and it
Yeah.
was awesome. And we go out there and camp in the grass afterwards because they let us do that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And we're
there.
laying. You can't even. It looks like heaven. It's just
Yep.
gorgeous. You can see every star in the sky. It was a pretty bright night, and man, I don't know, 2, 3 in the morning, the sprinklers come on right in the ground,
no,
right
of course.
underneath my sleeping bag, and I was in a little bivvy, and dude, we got soaked, and it got cold. I was thinking back, I'm like, it had to be close to freezing. Why would they run the sprinklers? But just because it's always cold in the mountains, even in the summer. But no, they ran the sprinklers that night. We got soaked and had to go off the line. Anyway, a beautiful place.
But that's another one. It's so funny because those are the little like side note stories that make trips.
Yeah.
Right.
You're woken up, scared to death, getting blasted in the face with water. And you're like, you don't even know what's happening for the first 10 seconds. You're trying to put it together. Yeah, man, those are the things that make you want to quit in the moment and say, F this. And then those are the things years later that make you want to go back.
Oh,
it's funny how it's the same thing as perspective is crazy, man. So
I came across the highest point well, you probably know that Indiana Pass is the highest point of the Tour Divide, right? Like as far as the highest mountain. And it was raining that whole day. And I mean, like people are gonna say, well, get out of it. Well, it doesn't matter if you're in a Great Basin and it's 80-mile-an-hour winds. If you stop, there's nowhere to go. You got to keep riding. You know what I mean? I can't hide behind a building. There's not a hotel to hang out at, right? So Indiana Pass, it was pouring rain. I end up pitching my tent in the rain. The Tour Divide, ride from sundown I did sunrise to sundown. Once the sun starts going down a little bit, I start looking for a flat spot. And then I give myself 10 minutes in the dark to pitch my tent. That was my day every day. I didn't ride at night a lot just because I didn't need to. I wasn't racing. So anyway, Indiana Pass, raining. While I pitched the tent, I woke up in my sleeping bag that was just soggy wet. Cold because I camped at 11,000 feet. And if I would have just dropped to the other side of it an hour later, I'd have been fine. But, I wanted to just stop where I was done for the day. But anyway, that story, like being wet or riding in the rain into New Mexico out of the mountains, like I had cars. This is where there's cars, some of the pavement area, pulling up beside me, honking their horn, giving me a thumbs up. And I'm like, I'm not happy right now, but I need to find shelter. You know what I mean? Like they think I'm doing it for fun. I'm like, and then you run into people like I'll meet people in New Mexico and they're like, oh, where are you riding from? And I'm like, Banff. They're like, where's Banff? I'm like, Canada. And they're like, that's like 2,500 miles from here. It's just funny, right? Like the way that people process stuff. But,
it is wild. I love seeing that reaction. And some people, it goes right over their head. That's one of the joys, or they don't process it I always tell this, usually when you're on an adventure and it's clear you're on an adventure like bike touring or backpacking and you go into a town, you are usually the anomaly for people's day. And so people want to ask you, where are you going? Where'd you come from? What are you doing? And it is so interesting to see people's reactions because I've been in their shoes too. And I understand, as someone that understands, I am one of those people that's like, tell me all about your trip. I actually got offended last year. This guy was riding by my house in Florida, and I was driving and he blew past my house touring. But he looked like he was racing the Tour Divide. He was flying. And I rode up next to him like, dude, where are you going? He's like, I came from Golden, Colorado. And I said, holy cow. I said, dude, that's where I pretty much moved from to here.
Right.
Well, like, who are you? We might know each other. Like, we might use the same bike shop. And he was like so uninterested in talking. I was mad. I was like, dude, I could have you on the podcast. We could go to the studio. Yeah. Like, I don't know if he's racing. He didn't say he was racing. So I was, and my wife was like, you don't know his plans. I said, well, I don't know. I feel like we should have chatted a little bit. Because that's what I like to do, but I can't hold that against him.
It sounds like we're a lot alike. Like these trips, and I was talking to my buddy that I'm staying with right now in Texas about it, but I
Yeah.
feel like, and it sounds really weird, but when I'm out on a trail, backpacking, riding my bike, doing different things, and you're coming across international people on a daily basis, because the people overseas really know how to embrace our national parks, sometimes better than our own citizens, right? Or
Yes,
US people.
absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
always feel like an ambassador for the United States because I want to like make them feel at home. If that may, I mean, I've offered, hey, you want to plug into my house when you're back in the Bay Area instead of driving to a urban city? You could hang out there with your adventure van you rented till you go back to return it tomorrow morning, right? And I really think that I love people's stories. I mean, I I know you got to go. Like one quick story about Kearsarge Pass. I'm in the Eastern Sierra. I'm coming off the trailhead. Uh, one of my paddleboarding trips. It's blowing wind. Luckily, it was my last day anyway. I come to the trailhead. I come down. I'm going to my Honda Civic. That's before I had the truck all built out to do this thing. And I see these two backpackers with like really good gear heading towards the trail. And I'm like, you guys are going in there right now? I mean, it's really windy. This is a bad day to start, right? They said, no, we're going to Independence. It's a little resupply town down below us. And I go, that's the opposite direction. And they both have accents. Well, one's from Australia, one's from New Zealand. I go, Independence is behind you. They go, yeah, but we figured if we walk up the trail and we pass you, you might strike a conversation with us and we might get a ride to town. And I'm like, okay, well, that's going to work. So I shifted all my gear in my Honda, put it in the back. And then the Aussie sitting up front, the New Zealand guy is in the back seat. And we start cruising into town of Independence. It's like 15 minutes down the hill. And then I go, what are you doing now? They're like, oh, we just finished Summit of John Muir Trail. We didn't do it all because of all the permitting's kind of difficult at times. And now we're going back to Australia. And we're going to fly out of LAX. So we're going down 395 south and then work our way over to LA with a rental car. I go, you ever been to Yosemite? And then Ozzy goes, yeah, I have. And they're like probably 30 years old, maybe early 30s, I'm guessing. And then the guy from New Zealand goes, I haven't. I go, hey, I'm cutting through 120 Tioga Pass, some of the most beautiful spots in Yosemite, to go through the main valley and head back to the Bay Area where I'm from. Why don't you cruise through Yosemite with me and see it? And I'll give you a ride to a rental car place and you could do it. So the guy goes, well, I've seen it. He goes, he hops out of the car. He's riding shotgun in my Honda at this point. He allows his mate from New Zealand to jump the shotgun passenger seat. He goes in the back seat and we ride, 4.5, 5 hours back to the Bay Area. And then I hear about these guys' lives and what got them to the John Muir Trail. Like where are you going to have that experience if you just don't? And I still, like, I'm friends with him on Instagram. He owns a furniture company. He's like one of these really cool woodworkers. They're both furniture guys. And then we follow each other when he comes to the States, or I see trips that he does. No different than if I'm not doing a trip, I'm either vicariously living through someone that is, or I'm listening to a story that someone who's done things. Same as you. Like your show gives me an out. Like if I'm not out doing something, I could hear about some guy that pushed a jog stroller and his dog around the world like you cover. And if I'm not actually doing it, I'm experiencing it. You know what I mean?
What I really love about that story is just the spontaneity and
totally
them willing to just go and see. I mean, the John Muir Trail is incredible. Yosemite Valley's incredible. Like you have to see that while you're there. Like you can't not go to that. And even though it is, a Disney World sometimes, there's a reason, man. That place is just so special. And especially Tioga Pass. I mean, just going over to that road and seeing that perspective of Half Dome and just, all the lakes and all the domes up there. It's just fantastic. And well, Randy, I want to ask as we close, because I better get going. I got to go actually get my mom.
I apologize. I kind of
gosh, no, this is awesome.
Long in here.
This is overdue too. You know what I mean? Like
I
this
know.
has been a long time coming. And
I know. I wouldn't. You heard me say it like that imposter syndrome. These are so many. Like these people do these crazy things, and I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go on there.
I
But
remember, yeah, because I've asked you before,
yeah,
and
yeah,
man, it's not. It's really not. It's really not the length or distance or time out or summit. It really is just the quality of the experience and the quality of the perspective of the person. You know, someone can take a story about walking to work, like our friend Bo Miles over in Australia, a storyteller, filmmaker. He takes that and turns it into a story through documentary. That's just like, he
yeah.
goes, I drive an hour to work every day. I'm going to walk today, which takes more than a day because it's 60 miles. It
Yeah.
takes a whole weekend
Holy
to
man!
get there to
Wow.
work. And he's like, what was that like? And it was so interesting because, and it teaches you, like, it's really just about the perspective. And so it has
Yeah.
nothing to do. You get people that have done the biggest, coolest adventures. They might be a total a-hole. You know what I mean? I don't want to talk to them. You know, I
Yeah.
want to talk to people who love this thing and want to see the world this way and can tell the story, man. These have been awesome stories. To wrap up, got a couple questions.
Yeah.
You got anything planned? And if not, that's fine. Don't ever feel pressured to like answer the what's next question. And two, what do you think you did right about the way you've approached this? And what do you wish maybe you had made adjustments to
Hmm.
earlier in life? I don't want to say regret, but like, what do you think you did right once you learned this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So the first piece, it sounded like what I have planned.
Yeah, yeah.
I did a 50-mile ultra run on my 50th birthday. My birthday's coming up in February. I'm planning on doing a 100 miler.
Are you turning
That
100?
No, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Maybe I'll do it on that. That would be funny. Yeah. Shoot, that would be some sort of a record.
I
It's got to be. But
think it would. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm doing a 100 miler because I do want to eventually do one of the ultras in Colorado that you have to qualify for, like in the San Juans or out that area.
Like a Leadville or something? Or
Yeah,
West
I kind of do, and
Hard Rock?
yeah, and you know what's weird about me is I have a hard time. Those races are awesome, and logistically, I put on a charity event. In the past, I know things cost money to put on, uh, but I could get somewhat of the same experience without being in a major event like that, an Ironman
Paying
or Leadville
thousands of
or
dollars too.
yeah. So some of
And
the
man,
smaller,
I'm the same way. I enjoy doing that work myself and having that
yeah,
more solitary experience without cutoffs and without aid stations. Like those things
yeah,
are awesome, but I don't know, I don't want to do it my way.
yeah, and I totally like Leadville is interesting to me. If you think about the Tour Divide, though, like one of my big days of climbing, I climbed over 10,000 feet and over 100 miles. Well, that's Leadville. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? I'm not at the 9 hour mark in order to get the big belt buckle, which would be super cool to get. But I mean, I've done similar things. Obviously, they're faster. It's a whole different situation. Your equipment, you're carrying way less. You're not carrying a tent, all that kind of stuff. I thought about doing, and I'm sure it's been done, but I thought about doing back to back Leadville and then an ultra run within, what are they, a week apart? That would be
Yeah.
cool to run to Leadville and ride to Leadville within a week.
You look
Um,
up the story on this show. It's one of those that's you're talking about where it makes anybody feel imposter syndrome.
it's
Robbie
like,
Ballinger did the Colorado Crush.
oh wow,
It is. Can I explain it real quick? It's
yeah,
the whatever. It's the three Leadville events. It's the marathon, the mountain bike, and then the
yes,
run.
okay.
But they're spaced out. Whatever three
Oh, it's
events it
probably Hard
was.
Rock. It's probably Hard Rock
It,
too. I bet that's a third one.
it was, but he did them, and in between, so he did the marathon.
Yeah.
Oh no, I think it was the marathon, the 50 miler, and the 100 mile. Anyway, I'll go look marathon. Then he climbed all the Colorado 14ers.
Oh, see, but when I hear
The
people do
the
that,
50
like that's
miler.
next
Then
level.
he did the Colorado Trail. Then he
Oh
did the
my
100
God.
miler, all in one summer.
Yeah. I don't know how, so I'll do the 100 miler. Like even this trip right now, I came down here. If you're not familiar, I follow a lot of CrossFit type stuff. That's kind of my foundation of fitness. I got a garage gym. I
I
work out a
interviewed
lot.
Matt Frazier, if you know him,
Oh, did you really?
for
Oh,
my
for Athletic
for
Brewing.
Athletic Brewing. Yeah,
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, he's kind of like when they think of CrossFit and the Mount Rushmore of
He's the
CrossFit,
GOAT.
names, he'd be one of them. Yeah, for sure. I know I didn't know. Yeah, he is. So I'm down in the Austin area to watch the Rogue Invitational this weekend, and that's like one of the biggest CrossFit competitions in the world annually. But I'm visiting friends along the way, and then obviously there's 2 national parks in Texas, and then a couple in New Mexico on the way out of here. So I'm going to hit those on the way out of here. I try to knock those out as I see them. Big Bend, Guadalupe, Carlsbad Caverns, and
Climb
then
up
White
Guadalupe
Sands.
if you can. I've never
Okay.
actually been to Big Bend. And then Carlsbad Caverns, spend some time there.
Oh, good.
I don't know
That's
how
what the guy I'm with said to do that.
I don't know, if you appreciate geology or just you're awe-inspired by just majesty. I know
Yeah.
you are, but
Yeah.
that place, I mean, I would go back there in a heartbeat to spend an entire day. I spent a whole day just about the first time
It's
I
funny
went.
you say. I feel that way about Mesa Verde too, like with all the little like community that they built on a hillside. I went through there, and I could have spent 2 days just understand, like, how did people build this? Where did the people go? I mean, if people, the listeners haven't seen or heard of it, it's basically like a old community that they built carved into a hillside for obvious reasons, so they can't be attacked by other villages or yeah,
Cliff dwelling is what it's
a
called.
cliff dwelling. And it's like they built a whole village in the side of the cliff by hand with however they, anyway, it's the most incredible thing
It's so
out there.
awesome. And
Yeah,
and
just one
it's
of
like
many.
that in the sense of like it's not an archaeological park, but it is like the and you start learning about how long it would have taken to form all these things you're looking, and the different types of stalactites and stalagmites, and the size of these great rooms, man. It is one of my favorite national parks. And I've been to probably about as many as you have, close to, a little over 30, and please go see that one.
Yeah, no, that's great, because that's on our list for sure. We were going to try to get some of the highest peaks per state on the way right now, but the weather is
Which would
kind
be
of changing.
Guadalupe.
Yeah, Guadalupe, and then like Black Mesa for Oklahoma, and then over in New Mexico too. But the weather's changing right now, so we don't want that to impact I don't want to drive 800 miles for it not to work out. So I'd rather stay south for this. And then back to your other question, as far as if I would have done anything different or any changes or that, I thought of this on a run because I knew the show was coming up, and a lot of people think of like when you go somewhere, you're leaving breadcrumbs in order to find your way, right? Like they say that, like you hear the old like fairy tales, like drop breadcrumbs and I can fall them back to get where I'm going, to where you've been. And I almost, as much as I like looking back on the things I've done, I think it's equally as important to have breadcrumbs ahead of me. And those breadcrumbs are like goals, like, okay, February, I'm going to do a 100-miler. Next summer, I want to do these national parks. I think without little goals ahead of you in life, it doesn't give you a whole lot of purpose. And if I have, as long as there's goals and things to kind of reach out and chase, whether they work out or not, just the research and I guess the journey to get to those that's just as fun for me than the actual experience when I'm there. And then as far as changing things in the past, I know it's cliche because everyone says that, but I think if I wasn't a product of what made me who I am today, like meaning the failures and the I guess challenges I faced along the way, I probably wouldn't have as many successes in the things that challenge me now. Because kind of what you said, like I won't quit unless I have to, because I quit on some things early, and I think those made me stronger in the long run, right? Like maybe you don't get that job, and maybe it was meant to be, and the next time that job comes up, you're going to be 100 times more prepared because you were turned down the first time. Not only are you going to be prepared, you're going to be probably more appreciative of getting that job because it wasn't so easy to get it. And that's part of it, right? So, and as far as for people listening and trips, and I haven't done a whole lot, I mean, compared to some of your people, but I would just say that the sooner you could get out and experience things locally, regionally, even around the world, the more you're going to realize is out there. And I wish I could have started a little bit earlier in life. I started doing a lot of these things in my, mid 40s on, with my kids, but I also need to make sure that they were involved in things when they were young, to keep them busy and to keep that, to kind of challenge them in life and prepare them for the future. But I can't really say I wish I would have never had them in team sports or different things that prevented us from doing these trips. But I would say if you don't have a big window, take advantage of the window you have.
36 hours.
36 hours. And I'll tell you what, I'll challenge people to sit and watch 36 hours of your favorite show. I don't want them to do that because, again, that's not necessarily healthy for you. Or go do a 36-hour road trip a month later and see what you've experienced. See if that 36 hours felt longer in which scenario. Because I'll tell you what, I'll do an adventure in 2 or 3 days of camping and hiking, and I feel like it's 3 weeks.
Yes, slows time down. Adventure slows time down.
I really think it does, and it gives you a chance to kind of unpack the things that are going on at home and fix things when you come back. So
yeah, it does. A lot of my trips these days are Friday after work till Sunday night, and that's no time off. It's a standard weekend, and it hits everything I need it to. As someone who's experienced multi-month trips, it's like, this is what I need. This is perfect. And it feels like you said, 2 weeks. I don't know how it does that, but it does it. So.
I just came across, you probably know these guys, but during my research for the Rim to Rim to Rim, it's a 60-hour something it's called. It's on YouTube. Have you seen that? It's 2 guys. One guy's like a mountain guide. He's a guy about my age, I don't know, 40s to 50s, that has a ton of experience doing different things. And then his buddy is like a tech guy that works 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Kind of when you think of like my cousin, what I just described, he's in a traditional job, and these guys have 60-hour experiences and they do YouTube videos about it. So they do that. They do the Rim to Rim to Rim was one of it. The guy that they actually did it with was on a brand new prosthetic blade that he did Rim to Rim to Rim with. So he's basically, a disabled guy on a prosthetic doing the trails that I just did. I'm like, if he could do it, I should be able to do it. Because that's incredible. It's a new, and it's fresh to his limbs. So it's not, like the chafing and all the stuff that you eventually work out. This thing was brand new. So they did that. They did the Tahoe Rim Trail in 60 hours. So one buddy, just like you, hey Mason, we're doing a trip in June. Okay, well, where do you want to go? Hey, it's closer to my coast. How about I pick you up at San Francisco Airport? We're going to go do the Tahoe Rim Trail, and then we're going to hustle on bikes because we don't have the time to hike it. And then I'll drop you off the airport when we're done. That's what this show's about. It's super cool. It just shows awesome. You could do a lot. So anyway,
man, the one I thought of was the Beat Monday guys, Mike Chambers and Jason Anton. They had a show on Outside TV where they would Friday afternoon to a Monday morning, they would go international in that amount of time.
Yeah, I think that's them. I didn't know
Chambers,
their names.
He's been on the show.
Oh, how funny. I probably listened to it, didn't I? I've listened to I go back to your shows and I'm like, I forgot I even listened to that show, because there's several podcasts that I listen to for different things, but yours is my greatest escape for things I want to do. Or, we all are realistic. I can't say I can't, because everyone can, but it's going to be hard for me to go paddleboard down to Mississippi. You know what I mean? Right. I could do it. And you had a guy who did that. Remember?
Yeah.
It was enough. And I'm like, just hearing those stories, I feel like I'm almost there, because a lot of them are really good storytellers. So you really feel like you're part of the experience.
And it's inspired you to do your own version of that, whatever that is. You learn, you've shared a lot, not just the stories, but you've shared some principles and some things that apply to anybody. And that's what it's about, man. We're not about the how-to on this show. It really is to provide that inspiration so that you'll get out and do that next thing, whether that's this weekend or when you retire or whatever it is. And so many stories out there, so many adventures, and that's why we replay visited episodes on Thursdays, is because, heck, I forget. I'm like, what did we talk about? Let me re-listen to that show, and I'm like, man, I forgot they said that. That is so cool. So, man, well, Randy, this was awesome. You're living it. You're doing it. This is awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show and telling some of your story.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I mean, it's an awesome opportunity to kind of live through all these people.
Well, now people are going to be living through you. How cool is that?
Yeah, right. They're going to be like, yeah, I know, right. Yeah.
You're one of them too, Randy. You're
they're
one
going
too.
to be like, oh, I mean, I think you had a show. A guy rode a unicycle across somewhere, didn't he?
Oh yeah,
Like
we've had.
I'm like, what?
We had skateboarders go cross country. We've had
Yeah.
just
I
random
mean, that's
stuff.
it humbles you when you run into people out on the road. That's for sure.
It does, man. Man, you've been such a huge supporter for so long. It blows my mind people even listen to the show. I put it out there. I mean, I'm just on a screen, I put it out there, and
maybe I'm the only one. Maybe it's been me all this time. No, I know better.
One listener per episode.
Yeah, that's great.
But all right, man. Well, safe travels, and thanks for being on.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll talk soon. See ya.
Bye.
Bye. First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.